Hey everybody, it's Mike from Fishing the Mid-South, and today we are going to go over the Pflueger Pressp40x. I do apologize, this light, it's a headlamp in addition to the two lights that I have. It just, as I get older, the more light I have, the better I am. So it's the Pressp40x. Specs on it, 14 pounds of maximum drag. The weight is 11.5 ounces. The retrieve rate is 31.6 inches per turn with a gear ratio of 5.2 to 1. The break capacity is 320 yards of 10 pound, 280 yards of 14 pound, or 200 yards of 20 pound. Then looking at the mono capacity, 285 yards of 8 pound, 230 yards of 10 pound, and 195 yards of 12 pound. So this is the previous generation, which I believe the only thing that's changed is the color scheme. So it has 10 bearings, graphite body and rotor, braid ready spool, stainless steel and oil felt drag washers as opposed to the carbon fiber drag washers, aluminum handle, soft touch knob, aluminum bail, and the slow oscillation gearing. So that's the exciting part of that. There's the box. You can get them in the box or in the blister pack. These just happen to have come in the box. And of course, it comes with a little owner's manual. And this section is the English section on here. And it just tells you how to make a cast. And then how to fill the line with spool, set the drag, how the anti-reverse system works, and the care and lubrication. So for it talks about generally you're just going to use light machine oil on the line roller and the main shaft where it comes out of the reel. And then maybe once a year, break it down and go deeper into it. And then here is the parts diagram. And I'm going to try really hard to use some of the right names as opposed to this thing and that thing. So I'll start off by saying I can't find my oil, my reel oil. So this is a new reel anyway, so I'm really not going to be doing much to it, but I am going to go through the teardown and all that fun stuff. So basically, your first step before you take the rotor off, let's go ahead and back out the handle. So the handle is a screw-in type, and then it is reversible, so you can take off this cap on the other side and screw it in here and have a left-hand retrieve if that's what you want. And then put the cap on the other side. So anyway, that's that. So let's go ahead and take out the spool. That's the first place to start on this. And in most cases, we're not going to get into the drag system, but it is under these 3 screws. And let me see if I can find an appropriate size screwdriver. Also, it's always a good idea when you take these reels apart, any reel apart, break your phone out and take pictures along the way. That way, when you can't remember where something went or which way it went, you have that available. The other option is what I choose to do usually, which is buy 2 of the same thing, and that way you've always got one that you can go back and look on. So this is your drag stack. Starting at the bottom, of course, that's just the spool machining itself. You have a felt drag washer. You have a drag washer, or a stainless steel. Then you get another drag washer. Then you've got the keyed washer, and that goes in these little 2 grooves. Got the ears on it. And as I'm doing this, I try to keep things reasonably straight. Then we have another drag washer, felt washer, and then the other steel washer. Then, of course, this is all self-contained. So we can go ahead and put that right back together when we're done. and not have to worry about leaving the parts laying around. So it is pretty much lined up there, because this center ring, of course, does move around. There we go. Once you get the first one in, the other two should be a lot easier, because everything should be more lined up. And you'll replace those felt washers as your drag just ceases to function properly. It takes a lot to wear out drag washers, so just a heads up. You don't want to hulk them tight, but you do want to snug them up a little bit. So under the spool, you have, so this piece right here, that is your line keeper. You can put your line under there, and if you don't have it, on a rod, or if you have it broken off. And then this little guy is what makes that noise, the clicky noise, when you go backwards and activate, when the spool goes backwards as you're running your drag. Yep. And then, of course, you get the drag knob. Okay. That brings us down to the rotor and its associated parts. So when we talked about things that you can oil this. Just put some oil here on the edges of this roller guide. And then let's take off this stack, and we'll go through the parts and pieces together. Okay, so on top we have the spacer, and just below the spacer we have a fairly thick washer, which may also be a spacer. No, that's going to be the shielding for the bearing, sorry. So you get the bearing, and it actually has the centerpiece that comes out. There's your bottom shield, and that's going to be your top shield here. And then your spacer. Below that, we've got the gear that makes the noise with the other part that I showed you under the spool. And then finally under that is another washer. So let's put that all back together and stack. So that way when we're ready to put it back on, we've got it all ready to go. And let me make sure I'm giving you good words on things. So let's see. That's all the 11 is going to be a sheet washer. 12, those are both considered washers. We had the bearing, we had the bearing sleeve. And then 15, that is called the click gear. Woohoo! And then you got, of course, your main shaft here. So now we're going to take off this screw. And this screw is just a retainer for the nut that goes on the main shaft that holds the rotor on. So there's the screw, and there is that retainer. We'll put those together here. Then go down, loosen that nut. It is a lefty loosey, righty tighty type, so just standard. Now, the top is kind of rounded off just a little bit. Bottom is not. So, just in case you're wondering on the orientation on that, then off comes your rotor. Okay. Make sure there's nothing. Nope. So nothing else is attached to the rotor there. You do have this one washer. We'll just slap that on the bottom of the rotor. so we know where it goes. Then all of this is going to be, I'll call it your anti-reverse clutch. Let me make sure I get the right terminology here. The one-way clutch. So that's your one-way clutch assembly. I really try not to take those apart because you got little springs and all kinds of other fun stuff in there. I do try my best not to take those apart. If you have to, then you have to, and that's another problem for another day. Let's go ahead and take off the side plate. There, that's the one I want. And try your best to use the appropriate size screwdriver for these screws because they can strip out fairly easily. The heads of them can. So that's going to be, as the stem faces towards me, going to be the one on the top. And you do, of course, have to take the rotor off to get to this screw that is part of the housing cover. Take this screw out. Those two look to be identical, and this one's going to be a little different as far as the size of it. Actually, it looks like it's the same, but they usually are a little different, so I'll hold it out like that. And when you take the side plate off, you always want to bring it up towards you to minimize the amount of stuff that falls out. Oh, sorry, I have to take off these pieces. So this screw here, back screw, holds in these trim pieces. So you get this trim piece that actually locks in this one. So this one goes off and hits up on the top on that little nub sticking out, and then the other one comes in behind it, and then that holds it into place, and it has this tab that goes under that screw. If I can gently pull this off. There. Get up by this piece would be the easier way. Okay. And again, as I said, this does not need any maintenance. It's brand new. But if you are going to service your own reels, you have this ball bearing here. You just want to put a drop or two right here in the little niche in there, and then roll it around a little bit so that it gets inside. And this is your main gear. And the bearing came out. Oh no, there should be another bearing on the other side. Let's see if that's accessible. There it is. I'm just kind of pushing from inside the hole. It'll come out, and you can go ahead and put oil on it as well. So you get this retainer piece here. Quit grabbing the wrong screwdriver. So the purpose of this little guy is to keep this piece in check. That just keeps this piece from coming up. And let's see what we're going to call that piece because it looks like a fun one. I'm sure it has a name. That is the OS slider, so the oscillating gear slider. And that piece holds in via this screw the main shaft. screw out. And this allows the main shaft to come out. But once you've got the main shaft pulled out that far, you want to go ahead and oil this part of the shaft here. And you want to apply grease around this gear, and around the pinion gear. So all those are your moving gears inside there. Again, we talked about the other bearing here. And then, of course, you've got your anti-reverse switch, which works with your anti-reverse bearing. And that is basically the simple maintenance on one of these reels. I don't want to go too deep into a teardown because most people are not going to want to go any deeper than this. And I'm trying my best not to bore people to tears. Okay. So let's get screw back in place. You do need to be careful on this main shaft. You can put it in backwards, meaning that if you flip this piece over, it will bind up. So if it moves back and forth, you've got it in the right way. If not, it will bind up on you pretty badly. It will not be subtle at all. Okay. And then we talked about this piece. Whose job it is. And if I put it on right, that helps. Here we go. And it just keeps the bottom of this oscillating slider from being able to come up when you're torquing down the reel with a big fish on the line. Then once you oil this bearing, you put it back in. If you want to, when you slide the main shaft out, you can pull this gear up and then this gear up, and that'll help get that bearing out of the side plate. It can come out without it, but sometimes it's a little easier to take that out as well. And then we put our main gear back in place. Make sure that everything turns pretty smoothly, which is what we're expecting out of this. And then we put on our side plate once we get it oriented correctly. So on the side plate, we got this front screw. And let's go ahead. We'll put on the rear trim piece. That's the lower of the two, and again it goes over that little knob. And then we've got this piece which locks it into place by virtue of this screw. And then we'll put the top screw in. So this is a good spinning reel for bass or skipjack, for bait fishing, things like that. Again, the line capacity on it, what did we talk about? This one, so on mono, 195 yards of 12-pound test. So for the most part, I don't like using more than 10 or 12-pound test on a spinning reel. Now, that does not mean you can't. I do have my surf fishing gear that has considerably heavier line than that. But especially with mono, it gets so much line memory in it that it slaps the guides pretty heavily. So that's what the size 40 type of fishing I would do with the size 40. And the 35 can do kind of similar functions as well. It just depends on the size of line that you're going to be using, the weight of the reel itself, because that's going to be a trade-off, the diameter of the spool, which will kind of determine which line guide, size line guides it's going to work best on. This would also be a good reel for like channel catfish, pretty much anything except for your really big freshwater fish like blue catfish and such. So we put on the rotor retaining nut, and the washer that was underneath it, we stuck that on too. So now we've got the retainer for that nut. And there's the screw that should hold it into place. We can get that angled up properly using a really small screwdriver for that to try to get it in place. Did not work. Let's see if this will catch properly. There we go. Of course, you don't want to cross thread any of this stuff because that's going to give you a bad day. Apologize for the phone noises and the train in the background if you can hear that. Try one more time, getting that little guy started in there, and there we go. So you get that in there like so. Now, another thing that you can do when you're oiling up this roller, there's a Phillips screw here. You take that out like so. And that opens up your line roller. So this line roller is wrapped around a bearing. So you would, again, put a couple of drops of oil on both sides of that bearing, and spin it around. You've got a little plastic washer slash spacer. Now the way this goes in, you got a, there's a divot there, the low part of it, you get, so it's close to the very edge there. So the longer piece, the longer edge of it goes here, and then the short edge goes up against the screw, or the side with the screw. And then you would just tighten all that up. Again, snug it down pretty good. You don't have to over tighten and hulk on it or anything. Now we're back to this big stack of stuff that we talked about earlier. So we put the first washer on. Then we put the gear. And we've got this bottom part. That's the shield for this bearing. We put the bearing on. The upper shield. Of course, we would lubricate that bearing on both sides as well with a couple of drops of oil. And then this is going to be your spool spacer. And your spool spacer, this did not come with an extra one. Some reels do, some don't. But what happens is when you spool your line, you have the line at an angle like this, so you get more stacked at the top than at the bottom, because you want it to be pretty much even from top to bottom as far as how the line lays on here. So if it's too much at the top, then you need to push it up a little bit, and that's where you'd add a spacer here. If it's too much towards the bottom, then you need it to come down a little bit further, and that's where you would take one of the spacers out. And if for some reason I've gotten that backwards, you'll know it as soon as you start laying the line on it again. But yeah, yeah, it is right in my head. Okay, so that, put your drag knob back on, put in our handle. Which isn't always as easy as it feels like it should be, and that's just because you're coming at it from an odd angle no matter which way you go. You just kind of keep rolling it around until it's going to catch. Once you get that first thread caught, you're set. There we go. And then just hold onto your rotor, give it a little extra snug up, just so you've got the play out of it when you go out to use a reel. And then put your other side cover on, and there you are. That is the Pflueger President Pressp40x. I have other videos on my channel of various reels. We'll go over some teardowns, maintenance on them. It's always a good idea when you take a reel apart to see if there's a video already out there on how to take it apart, so that when you run into questions about which way did this go, you've got that. Plus, again, like I said, take your pictures of it and you're good to go. And as always, no spare parts, which is always a good thing. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.